define your success as a coach on the outcome and the results, or on the development of your players? Okay, so that first section is leadership. I think one of the key things to identify here is there are many different ways of leadership and there are many different ways to show leadership. I think a great example is a wolf pack analogy. And now a lot of people think that the leader of the pack is at the front. In actual fact, what we tend to find is the leader is at the back because they have a good field of view and that they are able to keep their pack safe, which when we talk back to evolutionary response is the sole purpose of that leadership program. Okay, so when we think about it in terms of football specific, there are lots of different ways that we can show leadership. Now we see leaders lead from the front in terms of vocal, being the loudest on the pitch, being the motivation behind a lot of the actions and behaviours that we want to see. But then there are also the silent leaders and the ones that lead through their behaviours and their actions and don't necessarily say too much, but you know that their behaviours are for the good and for the benefit of the team. Now that's something that we can see, but there are also ways of kind of coaching the leadership as well. But in terms of developing this, it's through having clearly set and defined goals. Now this is something that as a coach you can speak with and you sit down and you have these conversations with your team, but having these clearly defined values and goals allows you to take responsibility for your behaviours and actions. So say for example, if a player understands that their role within a team is to be the workhorse, is to be the box-to-box midfielder, that's how they can be held accountable for their actions, so that after the game when you're doing your reflections, you can turn around to that player and say, do you feel that you've met the roles and responsibilities that we established? Now this also brings into another key area for development, which is the consistency in the message. So say for example, if you say, we want to develop and I want you to be the box-to-box midfielder and I want you to be the workhorse and the engine behind the team. And then, for example, in the reflection you highlight that they don't do that and that their standards are falling below what you expect and yet you don't move forward on that message. Is that a consistent message and is that something that is going to relay across the team? What we need to be consistent in the messages that we said. So this is where having these clearly set values but then holding them accountable and being consistent in the message is going to develop your leadership skills. And I think the next stage is communication. Now one of the key things to highlight here is there are lots of different ways that we communicate, and we've spoken about this a lot and the research suggests it as well. Now when we're talking about building an effective team, that communication is the pivotal part of the development. It's almost part of the core value of the team. And one of the suggestions and some things that we see are when a team feels like they can communicate honestly and they also feel that they have a platform to deliver that communication, that's where that shared ownership and responsibilities start to develop. So my question to you as coaches is, how much opportunity do you give your players to communicate and to relay some of their messages of how they're feeling? And now that's nothing against you as a coach. I think it's very important that you have that role and responsibility because in the knowledge element of the thing, you have a lot more knowledge than the players and you can impart some of that wisdom for their development. However, would it benefit the communication environment in your team if you opened up more of the elements to the players and gave them a platform to speak? A key example for you as a coach might be after a loss. Now in the emotional heat of the situation, you might want to take a vast majority of that speech to highlight the key learnings, what you can do to improve, but also your key findings from that situation. But ask yourself, would this be more beneficial in terms of communication, building this honesty and open culture to allow your players to do that reflection, to give them an opportunity to speak about the situation and maybe what they learned from the situation? That's one to think about. Talent wins games, teams win championships. You all know who said that. But as evident in football as any other sport, it's about relationships and the relationships that you have with your team. Because those relationships allow the culture and allow you to create an environment for their development. not just for their development, but also for your development as a coach. Now, when we're talking about these types of relationships, some of the key environments and some of the best cultures in the world, so New Zealand rugby team, it's about removing the I and me and promoting values such as we and us. All of a sudden that promotes honesty, and that honesty feeds into the culture and the environment that you create. Ask yourself this question as coaches: is it all about the football? Because behind every player is a human being. Now your challenge is to get to know that individual and understand how they respond in certain situations, and then tailor your coaching aspect and philosophy to meet the demands of that situation. Have you got to know them as an individual? Or are you treating them like a player? So when they win, how do you approach it, as opposed to when they lose? Now these are all questions that you can ask that will help further your development. Another key aspect relates to the honesty approach. Have you considered making yourself vulnerable in this situation? When we're talking about creating a culture of openness, do you share stories with your players, especially relating to a specific area where you have high levels of experience? Creating this vulnerability allows them to see you as a human, not just as a coach. And when they do that, again, we're creating a culture that allows communication that's not going to be judged. Because some of the key things within football environments are when we feel judged or when we feel like something is making an assumption, we are less likely to be open. And when we're less likely to be open, those messages can sometimes get lost.